Okay, let's set the scene. It's May 1940. Europe is, well, it's chaos. World War II is hitting hard, and Hitler's armies are just tearing across the map faster than anyone thought possible.
Unbelievably fast.
And you have this situation. 400,000 Allied soldiers, British, French, Belgian troops, they're completely trapped, surrounded. Their backs are literally against the English Channel in this small French port town, Dunkirk.
It's hard to really picture the scale of it, the sheer desperation pinned against the coast.
So this deep dive, we're going to unpack how this absolute disaster waiting to happen turned into, well, what many call a miracle, one of the most amazing rescue stories ever.
It really is astonishing. You look at the situation on paper, the odds, they look impossible. It wasn't just a battle. It was an entire army facing annihilation or capture.
Right. And what we want to do today is dig into the sources, pull out the key insights, the fact, maybe some surprising details about how this miracle happened.
Yeah, find out what really went down.
Exactly. Think of this as your way to get the core story, the essentials of Dunkirk, without wading through, mountains of history books.
A shortcut to the heart of it.
So, first off, how did such a massive force end up in this terrible position? It really comes down to how the war started, or rather, how it accelerated.
Right. The Germans unleashed this new type of warfare. Blitzkrieg. Lightning war.
Lightning war. Tanks, dive bombers, motorized infantry, all moving incredibly fast, coordinated.
And the Allies. They were sort of expecting, well, something more like World War I. Trenches, slow
A
advances.
static war.
Exactly. But this blitzkrieg just sliced right through them. They were prepared for the wrong fight, essentially. Crushed in weeks.
And the key German move, the really devastating one.
Well, that was bypassing the Maginot Line.
Yeah.
France's big defensive fortification on the German border. Everyone expected the fight there.
But the Germans didn't go there.
Nope. They went through the Ardennes forest.
Yeah.
Thick forest, hilly terrain, considered impassable for a large army, especially tanks.
But they did it.
They did. Just punched right through. And that move cut behind the main Allied forces who had advanced into Belgium.
So they were cut off.
Completely. The German panzers reached the English Channel around May 20th, trapping the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, and large numbers of French and Belgian soldiers against the coast at Dunkirk. The trap was sprung.
Okay, so disaster on the French coast. What's happening back in Britain? This is where Churchill comes in, right?
Yes, Winston Churchill. He'd only been prime minister for, about 3 weeks? Talk about trial by fire.
No kidding. So he initiates a plan.
Operation Dynamo. It was launched from these secret underground tunnels beneath Dover Castle, looking out across the channel. Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay was put in charge.
And his job?
Get the men out, as many as possible, and an absolutely monumental, almost impossible-sounding task.
Because the Germans controlled the land, the air.
And the sea wasn't exactly safe either. Plus, the logistics were a nightmare. The main port at Dunkirk, bombed heavily, pretty much useless for big ships.
Okay, so no big ships docking easily. What about the beaches?
That was the other problem. The beaches around Dunkirk are really wide, flat, and shallow, especially at low tide.
Meaning the big Royal Navy destroyers couldn't get close in?
Exactly. They'd run aground hundreds of yards offshore. You can't load thousands of men that way, waiting out under fire.
So the standard military options, docking at the port or loading from beaches with big ships, they were basically off the table.
Pretty much. It forced a really unconventional approach. When the normal way is blocked, you have to get creative.
Creative is one word for it. What did they do?
They put out a call, a public appeal for boats.
Civilian boats.
Yes. An urgent request went out for anyone with seaworthy vessels to help. Fishermen, ferry operators, people with pleasure cruisers, yachts, anyone.
Wow. And did people respond?
Amazingly, yes. Hundreds of boats. This is where the legend of the little ships of Dunkirk comes from. Over 800 vessels in total, many of them quite small, under 50 feet.
Just ordinary people sailing into a war zone.
Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. There's this one incredible story, Charles Lightoller.
Lightoller. The name sounds familiar.
He was a retired Royal Navy officer, but get this, he was also the second officer on the Titanic. Survived that disaster.
Laughed away the Titanic.
The very same. And in 1940, he took his own private motor yacht, the Sundowner, sailed it across the channel to Dunkirk himself, navigating through mines and dodging bombs.
And he rescued people.
Rescued over 120 soldiers, packing them onto his yacht. Just one example of the kind of courage we saw.
That's incredible. These little boats sailing amongst warships and bombs.
They became the lifeline, ferries between the beaches and the larger Navy ships waiting further out, or even taking men all the way back to England, was the birth of what people called the Dunkirk spirit. This, collective civilian effort, pitching in during a crisis.
When the military hit a wall, the people stepped up.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
Ingenuity and bravery from unexpected places.
But this evacuation, it wasn't some calm, orderly procession of little boats, was it? I mean,
Yeah.
the Germans were still attacking.
Oh, absolutely not. It was chaos. Hellish conditions. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was relentless.
What kind of attacks?
Constant bombing and strafing runs, especially the Stuka dive bombers. They had these sirens designed to induce terror as they dived. Imagine that noise, bombs exploding on packed beaches, ships being hit offshore, fires everywhere along the coast.
And men just waiting, exposed.
Exactly. Waiting in line, sometimes shoulder deep in the water, hoping for rescue. Soldiers drowning, weighed down by their equipment. The psychological pressure must have been immense, just constant fear.
It sounds like they were abandoned, just sitting ducks on the beach.
It probably felt that way to many. But importantly, there was a fight going on to protect them, up in the sky.
The Royal Air Force, the RAF.
Yes. The RAF was engaged in ferocious dogfights with the Luftwaffe, often miles away from Dunkirk itself, over the channel or further inland. They were trying to intercept the German bombers before they reached the beaches.
So the soldiers on the ground might not have even seen them.
Often, no. Which led to some bitterness, soldiers feeling like the RAF wasn't there. But there's that powerful quote from a soldier later. Something like, "We didn't see the RAF, but we sure would have known if they weren't there."
Meaning if the RAF hadn't been fighting, the bombing would have been even worse. Unsurvivable, maybe?
Precisely. The RAF pilots took heavy losses themselves, but their fight, that air cover, even if imperfect and often unseen, was absolutely critical. It bought the time and created the window, however narrow, for the ships to operate. It prevented a total massacre from the air.
So despite the attacks, the evacuation started to pick up steam.
It did. It was slow at first. I think the first full day, they only got us 7,000 men out, which, out of 400,000.
It wasn't looking good.
Definitely not.
But it accelerated. Day by day, the system got more organized. The little ships, the Navy coordination, it improved. And that image started to emerge, the long, orderly queues of soldiers waiting patiently in the water, disciplined amidst the chaos.
A symbol of hope, I suppose. Absolutely. And the numbers started climbing dramatically. By the end, on June 4th, after 9 days, the final tally was just astounding.
How many?
Over 338,000 Allied soldiers evacuated.
338,000. From an initial hope of maybe 45,000.
Exactly. It defied all expectations. A monumental achievement pulled from the jaws of defeat. Just incredible how they managed to impose some order on that chaos and get so many out.
But there was a cost, right? Not everyone got away.
A heavy cost. Around 40,000 Allied troops were left behind, mostly French soldiers who formed the rear guard.
They stayed to fight, to cover the retreat.
Yes, they fought bravely to hold back the Germans, buying crucial time for the evacuation to continue from the beaches and the harbor mole. Many were killed or captured. Their sacrifice was absolutely essential for the success of Dynamo.
So heroism wasn't just escaping, it was also staying behind.
Definitely. A vital part of the story.
Okay, which brings us to maybe the biggest mystery of Dunkirk. The question historians still debate.
Ah, yes. Hitler's halt order.
Exactly. The Germans had the Allies trapped. Total victory seemed within their grasp. Why didn't they just finish them off? Why didn't the panzer tanks roll in and crush them?
It's a huge question. On May 24th, Hitler ordered his tanks to stop their advance on Dunkirk. They literally halted for about 2 days.
2 days. That seems like a lifetime in that situation.
It was crucial. But why he did it? Well, there are several theories, and historians still argue about it.
Like what?
Well, one idea is that the German generals wanted to conserve their tanks, let them rest, and refit after the rapid advance. They're worried about getting bogged down in the marshy ground around Dunkirk, maybe a counterattack.
Okay, makes some sense. What else?
Another strong theory involves Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe. He apparently boasted to Hitler that his air force could destroy the trapped Allies alone from the sky. Maybe Hitler believed him.
So vanity and overconfidence from Goering.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And then there's a more political theory. Was Hitler perhaps hoping for a peace deal? Maybe he thought letting the British army escape, albeit disarmed, might make Britain more willing to negotiate an end to the war, showing a degree of, well, perhaps misplaced mercy or strategic calculation.
Still debated today.
Very much so. But regardless of the exact reason, the result was clear. That pause, those critical 48 hours or so, gave the Allies vital time time to strengthen their defensive perimeter around Dunkirk, and crucially, time for the evacuation to really get underway.
So that hesitation, whatever caused it, was the window they needed.
Absolutely. Many historians point to this halt order as possibly Hitler's first major strategic blunder of the war, a moment that changed everything.
So the evacuation ends June 4th. Over 338,000 men are safe back in Britain. But Britain is still in a terrible position. France is about to fall. How did they frame this event? It wasn't a victory.
No, definitely not a victory. And Churchill was very clear about that. In his famous speech to Parliament on the day the evacuation ended, June 4th, he cautioned against celebrating too much.
What did he say exactly?
His words were, "We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations."
So, managing expectations, a dose of hard reality.
Exactly. He knew Britain was now alone, facing invasion. He couldn't afford for people to think the danger was over. It was a strategic retreat, a survival, but the war was far from won. He had to balance acknowledging the miracle with steeling the nation for the fight ahead.
But then, in that same speech, he delivered perhaps his most famous lines, the ones everyone remembers.
Ah, yes. The rallying cry. "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender."
Goosebumps, even now.
It perfectly captured the defiance, the spirit that Dunkirk, despite being a retreat, seemed to ignite.
So, the legacy of Dunkirk, it's complicated.
It is. Militarily, it was a defeat, a huge loss of equipment left behind. But psychologically, immense. It was, as you said, a miracle of survival against the odds.
And that survival gave Britain
A chance to regroup, rearm, and continue the fight. Crucially, it saves the experienced core of the British Army. Without those men, Britain might truly have been forced to surrender later.
and the Dunkirk spirit. Did that last?
It became a cornerstone of British identity during the war and even after. That idea of national unity, courage, resilience, ordinary people pulling together in the face of overwhelming adversity. It wasn't just about saving an army, it was about saving the nation's hope. It really became the seed from which future victory could grow. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do nations find strength in their darkest hours? Dunkirk seems to hold part of the answer.
An incredible story. A defeat that became a symbol of resilience, a miracle of survival that absolutely shaped history. Thanks so much for walking us through that.
My pleasure. It's a story worth revisiting.
So for everyone listening, thank you for joining this deep dive into Dunkirk.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Dunkirk really shows how, sometimes, when everything looks lost, human ingenuity and sheer determination can create possibilities that nobody thought existed. Those small acts of bravery, the fisherman heading into danger, the soldier holding the line, they all added up to change the course of the war. History isn't just grand strategy. Sometimes it's found in that collective human spirit pushing back against the tide.